Thank you everybody for being here, coming out tonight. And congratulations to Willa and her team for such a beautiful, important film. It was really just lovely to watch. Again, thanks everyone for being here. And I'm going to keep our panel discussion to about half an hour because I think there's a lot of thoughts and questions that you're all going to want to share. So that's great. First, I want to introduce our panelists. They are Cora Hoppe. She's Executive Director at Rochester Child Care Center. That's a nonprofit center serving low to moderate income families with children aged 6 months to 12 years. Almost 300 families served. Wow, Cora. She earned an MBA from New England College in 2020. She partners with the United Way in Rochester and works with groups such as Moms Rising and Save the Children. So, Cora, what a treat. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Also with us, someone I've worked with on a number of issues over the years, Dave Juvet. Dave is Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire. The BIA is New Hampshire's statewide Chamber of Commerce, leading business advocate. It represents more than 400 members in a variety of industries, with member firms employing nearly 90,000 people across the state, so a big impact. Dave, it's really great to have you. Thank you very much. Visiting us from all the way from Alabama, you saw her in the film, is Jeana Ross, a lifelong educator. From 2012 to 2020, she was Secretary of the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education. As we saw in the movie, in that role, Ms. Ross helped create Alabama's state pre-K and early education programs that are nationally recognized as a model for other states. Today, Jeana Ross serves as a strategic advisor on early education policy and practice with the Saul Zaentz Charitable Foundation. And Secretary Ross, it's been so fun to get to know you, and welcome to New Hampshire.
Beautiful state. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, you've met her already, Willa Kammerer, documentary director, producer based in Providence, Rhode Island. She runs the creative agency Firestarter Interactive. She directed, as you know, the film we just saw. I got to know Willa when she was an intern on the Exchange. So we go way, way back. Willa, what a treat.
I know, so 13 years
treat.
Or whatever it is later.
What a treat. But we haven't changed a bit, have we?
Not at all.
It's great to have you here. And again, congratulations. And Secretary Ross, I do want to start with you.
Okay.
The film shows how Alabama has been investing in early childhood education. We all saw that for at least the past decade. What got this movement started, Secretary Ross? What was the push that made Alabama decide we're going to do this?
Well, it started with some strong advocates and advocacy groups that got together, got the agency, 2 or 3 important agency heads around education, and went to a governor that decided that this is what they needed to do to get children ready for school. So a Democratic governor, Don Siegelman, started a new agency. It was a totally new department, the Department of Early Childhood Education, and it was the department head was a cabinet member. So I think that bringing in not only the advocates that pushed for it, but our state superintendent of education at the time was actually asked, why he supported it. He said, if I had to choose between the 12th grade and the pre-K program, I would pick the pre-K program.
Wow.
So again, we had some serious achievement gaps. We had children that were coming in from extreme areas of poverty, disadvantaged, and they just absolutely said this is something Alabama must do to close that gap and have all children ready to learn.
Secretary Ross, was there an aha moment where everything kind of coalesced, or was it more gradual, where over the years more and more people said, we need to do this? Because I'm sure many of the people in this room care deeply about early childhood education and feel the same way, but I'm just wondering what the spark was in Alabama.
Well, I think by starting small, we had the 8 pilot sites. And then the next year, they had scratched up just enough money for those 8. And then it was very successful. And the parents started hearing, how parents talk, and started talking about this program and how special it was. And the next year, they got an Appalachian grant that could fund 43 more. So they had 43 more. And the parents, again, in their local communities were saying, this is a unique program, it is special, we want this. So the business communities started catching on. We had very influential businesses within the state, industry heads, those types of things that absolutely our BCA, our Business Council of Alabama, got on board, and it just all came together because I think the success, the parents advocating for it, people being able to see it in their own communities, because again, it was like scattered about because it was small, but it was scattered. It was able to be in every community within a certain mileage in the state so that it was known. So once we saw the success, we could document the success, it was much easier then to get the funding incrementally over the years to expand it.
And maybe we can talk about that later, how it sounds like you started small.
Started
so
small.
It wasn't so big and scary. You kind of started small with some pilot programs.
And
then
we
it just took
absolutely
off.
focused on a high quality program
Great.
from the beginning.
Well, to our New Hampshire panelists, Cora and Dave, just very broadly, we'll talk more details in a moment, but Cora, you first, please. Just what goes through your mind as an early childhood educator yourself when you watch this beautiful film about the investments they've made in Alabama? What does it make you think about, Cora?
Gives hope and opportunity to see something come together and really advocate not just for the field but for children and their families.
Yes.
And it's very exciting to see. Because in New Hampshire, we have small groups of that, right? We have really good private or public organizations, but really connecting all the dots together is really what we need. So having an outline to look at how these dots look connected is so important. So just to have a valuable resource to turn to is extremely exciting. Like just having her here in person right now gives me hope that there is change coming.
How about you, Dave? Just your initial broad thoughts, and then we'll get into some of the details later.
Well, first of all, I thought the film was wonderful. It was so affirmational, and it did such a terrific job of underlining the importance of early childhood education. But I'm conflicted also because, we have a long history of not supporting education, public education in the state as well as we probably could. And in many ways, the state leaves it up to municipalities because the state doesn't want the responsibility of paying for it. So, and I think we live in a really challenging political environment now, more challenging than when the film was made. I think there are segments of our population that don't trust schools, they don't trust teachers, they don't value teachers, they don't really trust programs, they don't trust improvement. And so in some ways I'm energized too, but I'm also cognizant that if we pick up this ball and run with it, which I hope we will, because I think if Alabama can do it and make it a success, there's nothing preventing New Hampshire from doing the same thing. But we need to understand that we have a lot of advocacy work to do. Della talked about who are advocates. We're going to need a lot of them because this will be an uphill battle.
Wow. No, I really appreciate your honesty and frankness on that issue, and the issue of trust in schools. And Alabama's system did turn out to be a statewide system. And Cora, just can you educate us a little bit? I mean, New Hampshire doesn't have a statewide system of early childhood education or really any kind of education, correct?
No, correct, and we're kind of piecing together from all different angles. So not only is our job caring for children and helping raise families, but it's really trying to piece together the system that is not well connected or even really supportive for early child care at this point. So I have to say, I have to agree with you. There is a lot of distrust in the air, and I think that was even caused more by COVID, that separation. So, not only is it the grassroots advocacy work we need to do, but we really need to meet parents where they're at, and we need to be supportive as businesses in our family cultures, for allowing, sickness and allowing for families to come together. It's really a huge culture change in our state, not just the small pieces getting put together.
Well, that gets to a question I wanted to ask Willa, actually. Willa filmed this documentary before all the tumultuous events of 2020, obviously COVID, but the killing of George Floyd and the resulting attention to racial, social, economic justice. And Willa, I think those slides that you had before the film started were so beautifully put. So you did all that beautiful filming. It was sort of heartwarming to see people, right, close together, face to face. Like, wow, the first time I saw that, I thought, oh, that's how life used to be, right. So you did all the filming, Willa, and then you sat down to create this thing. All this stuff happened in 2020. How did that change your sense or affect your sense of the core message and the core goals of this film?
Yeah, it's a good question, Laura. And, timing, it was quite amazing timing. We were, after working on the film for multiple years, we were just putting the finishing touches on the editing, in February, March of 2020, just as the world was entirely changing. And, had initially, we had already begun planning our big in-person premiere event. It was going to be in Boston at WGBH and, in May of 2020. And, first, in person got shut down for obvious reasons. So we had to kind of regroup and, learn about, the new virtual world and how to present a film virtually. So we, needless to say, postponed the virtual premiere to August 2020. But in that meantime, the world continued to evolve, and we realized that, the final cut of the film that we had made, in March of 2020 could not be the final cut that we released, because it would feel really tone deaf to, the situation, in our country. And so, we came together as a team. We did make some adjustments, particularly in the kind of opening and the framing of the film, just to strengthen our equity message, because it was always, an important core message of the film, and, one of the, Saul Zaentz Charitable Foundation's key objectives. So it really just helped kind of ground deeper in making sure that message came out loud and clear, especially, in the opening and throughout the film. And then, we also added, just felt like we needed, a disclaimer. We did do all the filming, before COVID, and so no one was masked, obviously, and that, we just needed to point out, and, I think that was emotional for some people to see that as well, so we just, tried to be as sensitive about that as we could be, and, we also added a lot of content talking about, I think what the pandemic and everything unfolding in the country, really brought out was how critical the early care and education system is, in the country, to support families, and, to enable parents to be able to go to work, and just to, continue building the social fabric of our country and our workforce. And so, we really just kind of doubled down in the mission of the film, right. Realizing that, it was important before the pandemic, some issues in the system, but it, is only all the more important
Exactly.
now.
The message and the mission feel even sharper now in a way. And Dave, how much has the pandemic thrown this issue of early childhood education into an even sharper spotlight?
Well, the issue that my organization has been focused on, and that our member companies are focused on, is workforce and workforce availability. And it's changed a little bit from 5 or 10 years ago, where we had the luxury to be concerned about the quality of the workforce coming out of schools. But the situation now is so dire that companies will look for anybody and take on the training themselves. We have a manufacturing member in the Sunapee region that says when it comes to hiring, if he can find someone that can pass a drug test and fog a mirror, he'll take them. So that's a slightly different issue than focusing on early childhood education, but that's okay, because that's a problem right now. And the beauty of your film, I think, is that we need to start thinking about this now and doing things about this now, not for the workforce now, but for the workforce we're going to need 20 years from now.
And as the film points out, for the workforce now, so that those parents can go to work,
Yeah.
as well as the workforce of the future. And speaking of workforce, Secretary Ross, as you know already, many states struggle, even before the pandemic, to find qualified workers in the field of early childhood education. One of the ways, as we learned in the film, that Alabama addresses is through pay parity. How did that work, Secretary Ross? How much of a difference did that make in terms of teacher recruitment and retention?
Oh, it made a tremendous difference. We were losing teachers. We would train them in some of the best instructional practices, and then they would be stolen, for kindergarten, because they could go to the kindergarten classroom and make what other teachers were making in the K-12 world, and they would have benefits and all. So I said, this we've got to do something. So one day we just got a list of every teacher in the state, how much they were making and how much it would take to get them up to that level of the teacher either down the hall or across town in the school. And I said, we're just going to have to budget for it. And we had come up with enough data that we could show our legislature that this program worked. And we had a cost-benefit analysis that it would pay for itself just with the retention numbers. Children were not being retained as much. The special ed referrals weren't as high, so we had someone do a cost-benefit analysis. So felt pretty confident about being able to continue having those incremental increases over years. So some teachers, it took $80 to get them up to where they should be. Others, it might take $3,000. Some of our Head Start teachers, it took 5 or 6. But so whatever it took, we got them there. Now, we couldn't do years of service, which was unfortunate. That would have broken the bank. But we were able to do that year and tell these teachers, stay with us, and that we will, from this point forward, you will get your step raises as well. But we had to have a starting point. And that was good. We kept them. We also were able to, as far as retaining teachers, they do get that coach and that extra support. They get the materials and supplies. You won't hear of the pre-K teachers in the first class pre-K program having to go to Walmart or the store to get crayons and pay for it with their own money. The funding is there. We have the guidelines, we have program guidelines, we have classroom guidelines, we have a monitor that helps them with their budgets. It's all budgeting. And they're not accountants. They welcome the help. This is not a got you kind of thing. This is let me help you make your budget to where you can be able to not only pay your teachers, and we don't call them aides, we call them auxiliary teachers because they have more training, they're paid more than a typical aide in a school or in a center. So it was being able, first of all, to value them as a professional and to get the pay parity where it should be. And that helped a lot.
I'm glad you mentioned the pay parity and the word teacher, and I noticed that the first time I saw the film, and Cora, I want to ask you about this. So in the film, they use the word teachers and early childhood education. Here in New Hampshire, the term often you hear is child care worker, daycare provider. How much does that word choice matter?
It's huge. And I feel like if we're viewed as a teacher, we'll be a teacher. If we're viewed as a daycare worker, we'll be a daycare worker. So it's really that huge shift. Like, we are professionals, and what we do is probably more important than what K through 12 does. And honestly, we ran into that issue, right, with the living wage. I pay my workers $17 to $22 an hour. I'm one of the only agencies in the state to be fully staffed. I work with UNH in order to pull in coaches and mentors. I am fully staffed. But as a private nonprofit, I am forced to do all of this. So why can't our state just invest and make sure that we can all do this together?
Well, and in just a few minutes, we'll go to your questions, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. But back to you, Dave, and then I have another question for you too, Willa. One of the business leaders in the film says, we will be advocates and champions of high-quality early childhood education. What does that mean to you specifically, Dave, in terms of not just words, but deeds?
Well, the one line in the film that I chuckled a little bit was, legislators listen to the business community, because that hasn't always been my experience. However, I think we are an important voice, and as you mentioned in your intro, the companies that are members of the BIA, which is a tiny fraction of the companies that exist in New Hampshire, employ 90,000 people. These are 90,000 Granite Staters that have a stake in this issue. So I think our best role, at least in the initial stage, is to act as an advocate to help explain why this is a critical issue. I mean, we have to remember, we're a state that until recently didn't have mandatory kindergarten. And bringing that was a struggle. That was not something that was universally accepted. So I think it will be important to have members of the business community there explaining why this is important. And I think it's a good idea to engage the business community early on in shaping how this will look for New Hampshire. I mean, there are some things we could probably emulate, but the culture is different here, the state is set up different, and there are some differences that we'll need to acknowledge and not necessarily see them as obstacles, but just recognize that they exist. And I think the earlier we can work cooperatively with our Department of Education, with organizations like Save the Children and others, to begin shaping this. What do we want it to look like? I love the idea of starting small with pilot programs, getting early successes, figuring out how we're going to pay for it. Is it going to be a combination of grants, state funding, contributions from the business community? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but I would encourage everyone to get the business community involved at an early stage.
Well, and that's why we're glad you were able to join us on the panel tonight, because it's an important part of the whole conversation. Speaking of the teachers, Willa, you interviewed many, many teachers, and it was so great to see them in action. Just clearly so dedicated, and they just love the kids. Besides the respectable salary that Cora talked about, what else did they say they needed? What made them want to stay in those jobs? Because we all know that connection with a teacher is so important. It's devastating when you have a young child and his or her teacher leaves. So go ahead, Willa, please.
Right. Yeah. I think Jeana spoke to this, a bit already, but that sense of being part of a community. They're part of a very supportive system and need that. Really, in the Alabama South system, feel valued as professionals, and they feel like there is a track for professional advancement. That they're not just stepping into this role and it's just going to be kind of a flat pathway forward, but there is this opportunity to kind of grow and continue developing. And as part of that growth, there's the professional development program with the coaching, and that is a very kind of custom tailored process. So I think all of those things, and then just feeling, you saw the footage from the conference. I mean, we were blown away. That was filmed it back in, it was January. And it was, as they said, quite a way to start the year. But to have that kind of really large community of support behind you, I think helps probably get through some of the long. I have a 16-month-old, so firsthand now there's some longer, harder days. So I think having that real strong community.
Well, I want to address something that Dave mentioned early on and ask all of you. Everyone in this film makes it very, very clear that this cannot be a partisan issue, and yet, as Dave said, we are living in a hyper-partisan era. Maybe Cora, you first. How hopeful are you that we here in New Hampshire could overcome this tendency and work together to improve early childhood education?
I think a little bit of hope, and we don't have a choice. Because honestly, our state is aging out. If we don't take care of our youngsters, there's not going to be anybody here to help keep us alive soon. So really taking that opportunity to invest is not a sign of hope anymore. Like, we need to make this change. If not, our state's not going to do well.
So very basic message.
Yes.
There.
We need a change, and we need to do it now.
Yeah. Dave, what do you think? You didn't sound very hopeful in the beginning, but I wonder what you
Yeah,
think.
well, I don't want to be Davy Downer,
That's okay.
but anyone here who works with the legislature knows that this is not an issue that is really talked about very much. But we're just a little more than a month away from an election. And one of the great things about New Hampshire is the access that we all have to candidates running for statewide office and reps and Senate seats. And I think we need to do a better job, frankly, of attending functions and asking them specific questions about what their position is on early childhood education. And if they start talking about K through 12, politely interrupt and say that's not actually what I'm asking about, because my sense is, in this another line that really resonated with me is, we have focused on K through 12 and think that the job's done. And so I think we have about a month to heighten the awareness on the part of candidates that this is an important issue.
Yeah, that line resonated with me too. There has been so much focus on K through 12. Secretary Ross, how did you work through the partisanship in Alabama? I'm sure you've got some pretty hardcore politics there too. So how did you work through that and stay focused on the goal?
I think because these classrooms were in, each community is unique. Not only is each state unique, each community is unique. And yes, we had structures and functions and processes in place that we didn't vary from, but there were components of it that would be varied depending on where it was, whether it was in the Black Belt, which is some of our poorest, most disadvantaged areas, was having just tremendous success with it. As much as our classrooms in Huntsville, Alabama, where NASA is. So what we would do is invite not only members of the community, the mayors, we would invite the representatives and the senators to come, see firsthand your children and their success and what they're doing and what it looks like and why it's important. It's amazing to me, and you have to keep the same messaging over and over again. You must continually explain 90% of that child's brain is developed by age 5. Mm-hmm. There are things going on now that we can absolutely close that gap, that achievement gap. And when we were talking about teachers too, we also emphasize, I wanted to go back to this because I think it's so important, that parent is that child's first and most important teacher. And we want to be able to support those parents, as you saw with our home visiting program. But we also invite those parents into the classroom, as you saw. They're welcome there. They can participate in activities. And those parents then go out. They're the voters. They talk to their leadership as far as their government leaders as well. So there's just many aspects of it, but I think it's developing relationships, looking beyond. Children are not partisan. We just have to look beyond some of these political hot topics and get down to what really matters. And that's the growth and the development of a healthy child and a healthy citizenry. We know, like you were talking about, or someone earlier was talking about, our problem, a lot of it is poverty and the issues that go with poverty. Other states, maybe their addiction problem. But what we do is we've got the research. We know that a high quality program is going to address these issues, whether it is crime, addiction, other issues that might plague our economy. We can take care of so much of that if we just get them off to the right start.
It's that secret sauce that they talked about.
Yes.
Last question, and it's for you, Willa, and then we will go to the audience. What are your hopes for this film, Willa, short term and long term?
Sure, yeah. I mean, one of the great opportunities of the pandemic and our virtual world was, that it enabled us to really, lean into the online world and building a community, a really strong social media presence, and also a very robust national community screening program with the film. So, in the time since we released it, I believe it's been screened in about 45 states across the country by different community organizations, universities. And the foundation has made that available all free of charge. So that's, that's just been really gratifying for all of us. So we hope that life can continue. We do continue we have a creative team that Jeana is part of, and Stacy, who has been here, is part of, and others who are not here. But we continue to, produce fresh content and, kind of focused on state by state to help really try to move this forward across the country. So we've been focusing in Delaware and Massachusetts. We hope to do more in New Hampshire. So, you saw this film, but we also, really see it as, kind of an ongoing community. So if you want to, license it in your university, educational licensing is available for, so you can have licenses forever. We are going to continue to make it available for free for community screenings, for your workplaces, for your universities, for, anyone who wants to screen it. So just reach out to us and we'd love to connect.
Well, we have about 20 minutes for audience questions, so we're going to turn it over to you. In the spirit of hearing from as many voices as possible, I'm going to ask you to keep your question or comment on topic, relatively short, even though I recognize that's hard because this is an issue people feel passionate about. So raise your hand and I'll call on you. It'd be helpful if you're able to stand up so that others can hear you. You can give your name or not. Also, if you'd like to address your question to one panelist or just the panel in general. So your turn, and person right here in the front, go ahead please. Yeah.
Okay. I'm Devin Quinn. I work at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, and we know that when the pandemic started and parents went home with their kids when they weren't in school, every parent struggled with that, but the majority of people and parents who left the workforce or reduced hours were women. And when K through 12 came back online, they were able to send those kids back to school, but childcare was a little bit different story for a lot of the reasons, and workforce challenges and adequate pay. So I'm wondering what the Alabama experience has been in terms of increasing slots and availability in communities, and also in affordability for parents.
Yeah, thank you very much. Go ahead, Jeana.
Well, as far as the pre-K program, they could charge tuition, depending. You remember the free and reduced lunch plan, where some parents were free, some were reduced. Well, you can use the TANF, I think, still. So we would set up a system where that if they chose to, an entity could, once they got their grant, they could charge tuition based on a sliding scale. So specifically for childcare, what we found was this. Once they got a grant for a 4-year-old program, the money that they were using to pay that teacher and whatever other expenses for that classroom, they could then focus more on their birth to 3 or their 6 weeks, wherever you started. So again, it's all about that one-on-one, working with people to help them with their budgeting and how to make that happen. And actually finding community support. There are ways you can find community support. Some of the cities, Birmingham, Alabama, for example, actually did a 1-cent tax. Now, I can't see that happening. Someone else asked me about that, and I said, that's very, very rare to see that happen. You might see it if you got to build a new school building, but not for pre-K or child care. But again, it is tough, and I know child care has just really received a huge blow. But it's just a matter of being able to get funding where it needs to be and spending it the way it needs to be spent. I know that we did come up with a way to, kind of hard for the 4-year-old bachelor degree teacher to be making one thing, and then the child care workers that were with the teachers, younger children, did seem stuck with minimum wage or whatever they were able to be paid. So we created a certificate type program where when they would complete some type of training, they would get a bump in pay. And they could layer those.
So before I go to another audience member, and I did see a couple other hands, I need to just go back over to my colleague Deli Champagne for a moment.
Yes, I am so glad you brought up the challenging legislature at times. It can be, but we do have some champions, really, that have decided to prioritize this issue. And one of them I invited to be on the panel. She was the first person I reached out to, and that was Senator Whitley. And then I heard from our legal department that because we've endorsed Senator Whitley in her candidacy this session, that she could not serve on our panel. So I had to call with the heartbreaking news to tell her that she cannot be on our panel, but could she please come and sit in our audience? So I do want to acknowledge that Senator Whitley and Representative Wallner are here. Thank you, Representative Bartlett's here. We do have champions that are going to, I hate to use this term, but fight this fight for us. So I just wanted to acknowledge that Senator Whitley was here, and I want to thank you for coming. And I'm so sorry you could not serve on the panel. So, yeah.
So back to our audience, I feel like I saw a hand way in the back. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I have so many reactions to this film. Yeah. But I do have a particular question. I am a professional licensed clinical social worker, and my career has been primarily in foster care and adoption work. And so working with families who are really challenged in many ways, and children. And my imagination is, Secretary Ross, that having done this for 20 years in Alabama, that you have some sense of, aside from the value of taking care of the whole child and the whole family, and networking with community supports, education to business to medicine to whatever, colleges, universities, that's an excellent connection, that you have some idea that there has, in terms of money savings, that mental health services and foster care services might be impacted.
In other words, you might see less of those referrals if we had a really robust early child care
absolutely, because
system.
the whole person that early child from birth to age 3, I would say.
Right.
I mean, you're talking my language about brain development and social emotional development.
Well, I think you mentioned that.
It makes a huge difference
It
when
does.
the child gets that kind of a start.
No, I was interested too in that when Secretary Ross said that early in our discussion when we talked about how you made the case to pay for this. One of the things you said was fewer spending on social services down the line.
Yes,
So
yes.
so thank you very much. Go ahead, Secretary Ross. Do you want to jump in there again?
Well, I was going to say too that I think in the long term, yes, but right now, I think that we're seeing some really concerning behaviors with children, and there's special and additional support that's going to be needed. We thankfully, right before the pandemic, had just completed developing a infant, toddler, early childhood mental health program. We had a coordinator, and we then started developing consultants in each region of the state, and that was we planned for that to grow. We also then implemented, we call it DECA, it's the it's the Devereux Early Childhood Assessment. You familiar with it? Yeah. So we trained teachers in challenging behaviors. We also were able to give some trauma-informed training, and I think we're going to need more of that to be able to have the outcomes that we hope for. But now, I would think in the next few years that's going to be something that we really must focus on.
Well, what are you seeing, Cora Lynn, in terms of the children's behaviors when they came back to the classroom after the pandemic?
It was extremely difficult, right? Because
Really?
when we came back, we weren't even allowed to touch each other at first. So
Yeah.
trying to learn to develop relationships. Well, at home they're going through a lot of trauma based off of housing needs and if I'm going to get to work or whatnot. So we are already seeing this with our kids. So we've already taken initiative. We hired a family advocate who comes in and work with families who might be having housing issues. Staff, the same thing. Like our teachers run into these same problems. So we hire family advocates to come and support them. The mental health supports is something big. The state's really starting to go up. We try to get involved in those initiatives so that we're trauma informed when we approach our children and families. So, but keeping up with those type of supports requires money in our continued funding. So I can do this because I'm extremely passionate about my work. I have children that I've had to run through this before. I'm a child of Head Start that was with a single mom, and I'm the first one to graduate with an MBA in my family. So I know it works. I am proof that it works. You know, but we can't do it by ourselves. You know, as an agency, yes, we are providing support for our families, but the reason our families feel like this is because we don't have adequate housing, our food costs are too much. So who's going to care about childcare if we have no home? So I was very fortunate that childcare saved me. I didn't qualify for any supports because my husband's a master electrician. So I'm very reflective in my practices in making sure I'm supporting my teachers. So if that's flexible scheduling, if that's paying for a dental appointment, if that is helping them with their rent, we do that.
Wow.
But I can't expect other agencies to do that.
We have about time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So I don't think I've gone to this side of the room yet. So let's see. Go ahead, Mary Jane. Yeah.
Well, I'm Mary Jane Wallner. I'm a state legislator and I'm on the finance committee for about the last 30 years.
That
So
intimidates
my
me
mind
right
goes
off the
immediately-
bat.
My mind goes immediately to funding, and one, I'd like to know how many children in Alabama are actually in this program, how many classrooms are there, and how much are these grants that the providers are receiving, and what's the cut, when do parents have to start paying for it? And was it all state money,
No.
or was there state
Okay.
and federal
So
money?
let me try to remember all that. So, it's not all state money. It can't be right now. We're serving about, I left right at 2020. So there's not been as much increase, but I think we're right at 44%. We had a study done and found that once we reach the National Institute of Early Education Research, and they'll do this for any state, did a study and found that once we reached 70% of all the 4-year-olds, we would pretty much have met our goal, because our goal was never universal pre-K. Our goal was to provide access to every child whose parents choose for them to participate. And by not having universal state pre-K, we can use other fund sources. We can use Title I federal funds to help pay for it. As an administrator in a public school system, I use Title I, homeless, at-risk, migrant, EL, any little piece of funding I could find. So I've actually got a PowerPoint where we do trainings on blending and braiding funds that I'm glad to share with you. Because again, and it was like our infant early childhood mental health program. We couldn't have done that as an agency by ourselves. So we had the Department of Mental Health, we had the Department of Human Resources, there were other in the State Department of Education. They're all brought together to help support this. But it was a matter of having a strong coordinator that could communicate and articulate the need and how we could do it. Mm-hmm. And it's keeping it simple. It's not weighing it down with a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy. It's just keeping a simple, you have to have processes and procedures, structures in place, but to keep it simple.
And this is the hardest part about being a moderator, is saying we have time for one more question and then.
Well, I think I didn't finish hers though. Was there one other piece of that was important?
I wondered what the cost per child is.
So you saw on the film that it was about, the funding we were spending was $6,500. It's more than that when you think about all the other funding sources we put in. That was the state funds at that time. Again, we had NEAR come in and they did that cost per child. And we tried, you can't capture all of it because we do have local match. We have some communities where, like you met Jeff Coleman, who owns the Worldwide Moving. He actually built a child care center at Troy University. So, you know, there are parts that we can't capture, but honestly, I would think if I were guessing right now, it would run around $7,500.
So I took two from this side, so I
sorry.
think I'm gonna go this side. One more, anybody else on this? Yes, go ahead.
How do you do? I'm Jackie Cowell from Early Learning New Hampshire. We do childcare advocacy, among other things. And so, starting at zero, Deli was able to come to our Zoom call with the childcare community. It was exciting, and she talked about the Alabama model, and we thought it was pay parity starting at zero for infant teachers and toddler teachers and pre-K teachers. That's really
That's a dream, isn't it? It'll happen someday.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, I think, one of the most important things, because childcare never closed, Laura.
No.
Most childcares didn't close.
Right.
There was no coming back, they stayed open. But I think really tying the childcare and the pre-K to be as
Exactly.
mixed delivery as possible, right? Is really important to have as part of the conversation. Because I think, I did worry as I was listening, how are the teachers, the infant teachers and the toddler teachers feeling when their pre-K colleague is getting, pay parity with the public schools? Does it start at 4, Secretary Ross?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
That's a
But
really
because
good
of the way,
question, Jackie, yeah.
yeah, the way the grants are done, like if a child care facility, like I said before, they're able to use that, they don't lose their 4-year-old program. And I know how important that is.
Right.
They can take that funding and then move it down and serve, have more funding available for their teachers, in the infant, toddler classrooms. So it does help.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we had to start somewhere.
Right.
We couldn't hold everybody back. So, hopefully, by starting with the 4-year-old early learning teachers, we'll eventually get to where
Start at zero.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just like the title of Willa's
Yes.
amazing film. Unfortunately, I do have to wrap it up by 8 o'clock. I promised I would. So I need to invite Deli Champagne back up for a few closing remarks and to give you all some important information before you head out on your way.
Oh gosh, so much to think about and talk about. Do you want to chime in a little bit? Are you sure? Okay.
We do love your voice.
So I have some postcards out on the front table. If you want to grab a handful of those and send them to your state lawmakers, I don't know who your reps are, who your senators are, so I didn't fill them out, but just put a little note on that postcard that says, please prioritize children this next session, support the omnibus bill, support the work that's going to be done to make sure early childhood is a priority. I would really appreciate it if you would take some of those, and I'm asking you to put a few stamps on those. Yes.
They'd be wonderful to take with you to any community forums you're going to with candidate nights. Your postcard would be wonderful to have, to ask the right questions. If when you go to a community forum, sometimes you forget what you really want to say, but having your postcard would be a great question for candidates that want to serve.
I think lawmakers here will tell you they listen to their constituents, right? They want to hear from you. So don't think that your voice doesn't matter, because absolutely your voice does matter. So I want to thank you all for coming out. Jackie, I promise we're going to get there. Every teacher's going to get the pay that they deserve. We're going to just work toward this. We do have a 10-year plan that we're working on. So we'll talk more about this in the future, but thank you so much for your support of this important endeavor.